Have you been caught in upgrade fever? Maybe you feel your phone is due for an upgrade, even though it's still working fine. Or is it your car, your kitchen, your couch, your bathroom? We're going to meet a family today who decided a number of years ago that what they needed was to downgrade. So they left their upper middle class life in Australia and headed for their new home in the slums of India. This is their story.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Well, this is not something we've done before on Signs of the Times Radio, but we have joining us via Zoom on the internet from Lucknow in India, Mark Delaney and Oscar Delaney, his son. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Kent. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be on the show.
So, yeah, I mean, look, we have spoken to people interstate and things like that, and probably actually overseas too, from the US, but never from India before. So just paint a picture for us, because it is Lucknow you're living in, isn't it, in Uttar Pradesh state?
That's right, yeah. So we live in this city called Lucknow, and by Indian terms, it's a fairly small city. It's only about 3 million people.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a significant city. It's the capital of a state called Uttar Pradesh. And amazingly, Uttar Pradesh is just one state, but it's home to 200 million people.
Wow.
So I know for Australians, those numbers are just absolutely mind-boggling.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we live in Lucknow, and we live in a fairly poor neighbourhood,
mm-hmm.
a place that many Australians, I guess, would call a slum.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a fairly informal neighbourhood. It's probably built on government land, so the houses are very small and fairly crudely constructed.
Mm-hmm.
So we live in a place similar to our neighbours, which is just largely one room. And that's our whole house. You know, it's our living room, it's our study room, it's our bedroom, it's everything. You know, you just convert it. You know, at night you get the mattresses out and it's your bedroom, and in daytime you put them away and it's your dining room and so forth. So we live in one room. We choose to live very simply. So we don't have a fridge, we don't have a washing machine, we don't have running water. So we have to carry our water from downstairs. So, yeah, they're very deliberate decisions that we make to live very simply, to try to understand what the lives of our poor neighbours are like.
Wow, look, I totally want to get into understanding that, but I guess I just want a little bit of a clearer picture first. So Oscar, the house that you're in there, are we talking like concrete and brick construction with a tin roof, or what?
Yeah. So it's mainly bricks with concrete in the middle, but the roof is actually fairly solid. So it's not far from the poorest settlement you could have. So our roof doesn't leak water. We can climb up on top of it to sleep at night. So it's a flat roof like almost all houses around here.
Okay.
So yeah, mainly brick and concrete, but fairly sturdy.
All right. So you've got internet there somehow. Do you have like broadband to the house? Do you have electricity, or you don't have running water?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess it's one of the ironies of modern life in India that sort of there's lots of great poverty, but then there's sort of quite good internet and good technology in other parts too. So we've just got a little broadband device that creates a hotspot that all our phones and computers can use. So yeah, that works quite well. Okay,
well, there you go. Yeah, it is fascinating. They talk about, the global village and everything, and I guess we're really having a sense of that right now, that, we can talk to you guys, living in that sort of situation. So these houses that are in this, and I sort of sense a little bit of discomfort about the word slum, but these are houses like built by the people themselves who moved in, sort of kicked out of farmland or not from drought or debt, or isn't that how it usually works?
Yeah, I guess just as farming becomes harder when sort of bigger multinationals can do it better and more efficiently, then more people move to the city and they can't really afford to buy a proper house, so they just move on to what was then the outskirts, but now is fairly central.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess they just start with a little bamboo and plastic shack maybe, and then after another few years sort of build up another wall and maybe get a better roof, and just slowly it grows. And now most houses actually are probably 2 levels. So if you own the first floor and can rent out the one above that, then if you're doing okay.
Okay. So, Oscar, you've been like back to Australia a couple of times and seen how people live here, and no doubt you've been to various places in India and seen how, the different ways people live all over the country. How do you feel about, going back to your little one-room place in Lucknow after seeing those other possibilities? Is it a bit of a letdown, a bit of a disappointment, or is it, coming home?
Yeah, I guess a bit of both, in that like sometimes when we go away for a holiday in the beautiful mountains in the Himalayas or wherever, it can be a bit tough coming back to the noise and the crowds and the heat of in Lucknow. So often the first few days can be a bit tricky, but usually, like on the whole, I'm very happy to live here, and I think it just gives me a nice perspective on life. I guess I can understand more the privileges we do have. When I am in Australia or am in a rich part of India, I guess I can appreciate those luxuries probably more than most people do.
Yeah, sure, fair enough. So how does it work, like in terms of your social life and school and things like that? Oh wow, you're right close to the train line, are you?
Yeah, it's only about 50 meters that way, so
Yep.
they can be fairly loud. Yeah, so I'm studying through the Brisbane School of Distance Education, so that's mainly online. I'm in grade 12 at the moment, so that works fairly well for me. I guess one issue is with the time difference. My class is at 3:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m.
Oh wow.
So I've got exception from some of the early ones, but I still need to get up early a few days a week.
Yes, and teenagers generally aren't too keen at getting up early in the morning, let alone for a 3:30 class.
A bit of a pain, but I manage. And I guess socially, probably more so than most Australian families, we spend a lot of time just together as the four of us.
Yeah.
So that's great. We sort of talk a lot, play board games and card games and all that. There's several other foreign families in Lucknow too that we spend a bit of time with. And also, yeah, I guess several Indian families and people that we're getting to know more. But yeah, certainly that is an issue, that there's fewer opportunities for relating with, I guess, people who speak our first language or come from our culture. So it can be a bit harder, but we're certainly making it work.
Okay, so I guess, I mean, you're a like you speak Hindi, I assume, and you've like grown up around a lot of like local kids. Has that have you formed some good friendships there?
Yeah. So I was born in India and grew up sort of speaking Hindi from a pretty young age. So I got lucky really in that I didn't need to put in the long hours of language learning like mum and dad did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess especially when I was a younger kid, most of my friends were Indian and we played lots of games together. That was great. I guess once I got a bit older, started wanting to sort of play more strategy games or card games or other things that they often hadn't played before or didn't know how to play. We, I think, had a slight parting of ways, and that my world just became a fair bit different to theirs as I sort of went to school and learnt new and different things and wasn't as interested in playing hide and seek or tag or whatever. So that made it a bit harder because they can't play cards or Catan or Carcassonne or whatever else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still do enjoy talking and playing with other Indian kids here. So sometimes we play soccer in the park or cricket or whatever else. And that works fairly well.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because it sort of seems like even though you're born there and brought up there, is still a little bit of caught between two cultures in some ways. Now, Mark, I'd really love to go right back to the beginning of when you decided, you and your wife decided that you would like to move to India permanently. Now, you had a law degree, you had a stellar career, possibilities ahead of you, but you ended up in India. How did that happen?
Well, it's a good question, Kent. So my wife, Kathy, did maths and computer science at Queensland Uni, and I did law and commerce at Queensland Uni. So, yeah, we were pretty well set up to pursue fairly normal, quite lucrative careers, I guess. But both of us had a bit of an epiphany, I guess, during our later teenage, early 20s, where we kind of basically, because of our faith and because of the scripture and some inspirational friends of ours, we kind of thought, life is clearly not supposed to just be about ourselves.
Yeah.
Life is meant to be looking at those around us and those in need. And we saw from the scriptures very clearly that God had a very special place in his heart for the poor. So
So,
we just kind of took
Mark,
the base.
why not then, become a lawyer, become a successful lawyer, make a mozza of cash, and be an extremely generous donor? I mean, there are incredible NGOs doing great work in all over the world. Why not take that route? Why actually take the route you've taken?
Sure. Well, it's funny you say that, because that's exactly the response that my dad gave me when I suggested to him that I was going to not practice law anymore
Yeah.
and, in fact, go and live in a slum in India. As you could imagine, a dad might be fairly disappointed in that. And so he was saying things like, you could join the UN, you could, go into politics, you could do all sorts of stuff to make a difference in this world.
Yeah.
And I said to him then, as I'd say to you now, I think God needs people more than he needs money. God
Right.
doesn't need a checkbook. If God's in something, he will provide the resources. He needs people on the ground. Now, I say that with some degree of, I need to moderate that to a degree. I think generally people in the developing world do the work in the developing world better than Westerners. And a lot of Westerners do a lot of harm, or at least waste a lot of resources as they go to the developing world, for a couple of weeks or 6 months saying, I'm really going to do some great stuff. Generally speaking, it's our view that if you want to go to the developing world and work with God and others to bring change, you need to be around for a long period of time. Just like Jesus was around for 30 years, learning the ropes of how things work and what the issues were before he really got stuck in. So too, we think you need to probably a minimum of 5 years to get some decent language, learn the culture, understand what the issues are, what the problems are. Then you're reasonably well placed to do something sensible about it. So Kathy and I came with that view. We said, let's go. Let's talk to Indians to find out if they think there's a place for foreigners like us. And if so, we'll stick around for a number of years. Well, in the end, that's turned into 22 years.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
that would be our caution of, yes, God still needs people in the developing world, but don't pretend that you can go for 3 months or 6 months and make much of a difference. You probably can't.
Wow. So when you did consult with local Indian people on the ground there, were they surprised at your idea to actually come and live amongst the sort of most disadvantaged communities and try to work that way?
Sure, they certainly were surprised, because they were used to foreigners coming and living in fancy houses with air conditioning and cars and drivers and all of that. So they were certainly surprised. But I think they were a little bit, happily surprised. And so these Indian Christian friends would say to us, look, if you're willing to stick around for a long period of time, not months, but years, if you're willing to learn Hindi so that you can speak with ordinary Indians, not just, the high class, middle class Indians. And if you're willing to work with us in our organisations with our ideas rather than come in and impose your ideas, then you're very welcome to stay. So in other words, they said, you can come and join with us in partnership, but don't come in and think that you're the boss and you're the know-it-all. And we thought, well, that's incredibly reasonable. We'd expect the same thing if someone came from India to work in Australia. So we thought that was very reasonable. And that's what we've tried to do essentially over all these years, is work with Indian organisations, helping them do what they do even better.
Okay. So has it been effective in terms of poverty reduction? Like what activities have you been involved with these other Indian co-workers, and what what sort of results have you seen?
Yeah, what kind of things have you done? And that's a reasonable question, of course. It's all very well to talk theory, but at the end of the day, have you made a difference? It's
exactly.
a very reasonable question. So look, what we've done over the years is essentially tried to find out what the issues are in the various slums that we've lived in and work on those issues. So rather than come in and say, okay, we're experts on sanitation or literacy or whatever, and do that, we listen to people a lot. So there's a lot of listening and a lot of learning. And therefore the response in the various slums has varied on the context. So in one slum that we lived in Delhi, it turned out that they got an eviction notice from the Delhi government saying, we're going to demolish your slum in 6 days' time and relocate you to the outskirts of the city.
Wow.
Well, that slum had been there for 30 years, and it was home to 7,000 people, and it was devastating news. It was in the middle of winter, it was freezing cold, the kids were about to do their yearly exams and so forth. It was terrible timing. So in that context, what we did was we helped with some Indian friends of ours run a series of community meetings. We then found out that people wanted to challenge this. They thought it was unreasonable. So we found some local lawyers. We challenged the eviction in the Delhi High Court. So because I'd studied law and I spoke Hindi and I spoke English, I was kind of found myself in a mediator kind of position between my poor Indian friends and the middle class lawyers as we went to the Delhi High Court. So in the end, we had a victory there, and the demolition was delayed. It was done very peacefully and non-violently in the end. There were no need for bulldozers. We managed to get a legal title for land for people in the new area. So that was one example of, we wouldn't have come to India saying, we're going to act for people in a slum demolition. But that's what was happening in that slum at that time. So that's what we did. In another slum that we lived in, unemployment was a big issue. So we helped people to get jobs. We'd help them to write a CV and, practice interview skills and so forth. In another, actually the same place, there weren't many kids going to school. So we worked with the local schools to help more kids get enrolled in schools. So you get what I'm saying. It depends on the context and what's going on around at the time.
Okay, so the work you're doing is basically, I guess, what could be described as community development work, sort of consulting with people, seeing what the issues are. It would involve a lot of community meetings, I imagine, a lot of sitting in circle with, with people considered to be like elders or leaders in the community, and then setting up meetings with various government people to advocate for this or that, or that sort of thing.
That's right. That's exactly right. Although the only thing I'd change in that is community meetings. It's important to consult all members of the community, not just the leaders. And India's a very patriarchal society, so if you call a meeting, you'll have a bunch of guys come.
Yep.
So you've got to work pretty hard to make sure that you hear the voice of women and of kids and of people with disabilities and so forth. So yes, lots of listening, lots of learning, and trying to work with people on their issues.
Okay. So, Oscar, have you been involved in any of this work yourself, like in terms of literacy programs or employment readiness programs or, work skills sort of programs? Have you sort of got your hands dirty there?
Yeah, I guess certainly not as much as these guys, probably more so just in the last year or two.
Yeah.
So my older brother, Tom, he is quite involved with this literacy organisation here in Lucknow. So he, most afternoons, goes out for 3 or 4 hours and with another Indian man sort of tries to teach kids literacy in quite a different way to the government schools, because the government schools usually don't really work. So I've been a bit involved with that this year and last year as Tom's gotten more and more busy. He's sort of traveling interstate for his NGO or needs to go to a government meeting. So I'm essentially his substitute teacher.
Okay.
So I've sort of learned the ropes of that system. I can do that fairly well. I'm friends with the other guy he does it with. So yeah, probably an average of once a week, maybe I'll go out for 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon to teach kids how to read Hindi.
Okay. All right. So do you have any plans for, like, when you're finished year 12, do you plan to stay there, like, with your parents in Lucknow, or are you looking at studying elsewhere, or have you decided yet?
Yeah, so it's all pretty exciting. Finishing school just in a few weeks, really. My exams are in about 2 weeks' time.
Yeah.
So I've decided that I'll stay in India next year till about May, then go back to Australia, to Brisbane, to start at the University of Queensland, probably study science there. So, I guess in the time up until I do leave, I'll be looking to explore volunteering with a few more different organisations around here and see what I can learn and who I can work with. But sometime next year I will be looking to start uni.
Okay, all right. And any particular direction you've established yet with that?
Within science.
Okay.
A few different things I might try. Probably the top 2 contenders at the moment are climate science, so a bit of maths and physics, and then weather modelling and sort of climate predictions.
Okay.
Also quite interested in sort of medical research, so looking for new vaccines and new treatment methods. So
okay.
I guess I'll start science and see where that takes me.
Yeah, okay. So science, but definitely the sort of science that has sort of immediate implications for the way people live their lives and how people are affected, it seems.
Yeah, that's certainly what I'd hope.
Yeah, sure. Hey, Oscar, your dad's mentioned his faith and that him and your mum came to India in the first place, sort of motivated by their faith. Do you guys like worship as a family at like a local church there in the slum or nearby?
Mm. Yeah, it's certainly been an interesting sort of faith and Christian experience growing up. So
I bet.
certainly far fewer Christians around than in Australia.
Well, that's
So
right. It's
we
it's
probably one of
Hindu
the
dominated, is it? The community where you're living, or Muslim, or a bit of both?
yeah. So this one's Muslim dominated, but
Hmm.
sort of the wider city and state and country are certainly Hindu dominated.
Hmm.
So yeah, we don't have all that many Indian Christian people around here. There
Hmm.
are certainly some. So there's been a significant emphasis on sort of like just doing things as a family together, reading the Bible, and talking about that, sort of having family discussions about sort of faith issues. So be it like, should we give money to this person, or where should we live, and how simply should we live, and all of that is kind of faith related.
Yeah.
So a significant emphasis on like within the family faith and Christianity, but there certainly are other people, usually foreigners, but some Indians too, who we sort of get together with from time to time.
Okay, so it's sort of a small house group sort of arrangement when it comes to worship, rather than like a big
Yeah.
sort of church building somewhere. That's fascinating. I guess at 17 it is an age when a lot of people go through a bit of a searching stage when it comes to their faith, and they're looking at a situation where perhaps they're going to start making their own decisions about a lot of things, including their faith. Do you see that sort of questioning phase coming up for you, or do you see yourself sort of sticking with the way your parents raised you? Any idea there?
Yeah, a bit of a thorny question. I guess a bit hard to say in advance.
Absolutely, yeah.
Largely, I'd say I'm quite similar to mum and dad in lots of ways, in sort of my faith and my sociology or political views and what I'd like to do with life. I guess certainly there's some differences. So I'm certainly keen to explore my faith more. I'll probably look to get baptized next year, maybe when we're back in Australia or here. So certainly faith is important for me, and I guess I'm still exploring what that means for me as an individual rather than just as part of our family.
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's really important. Now, Mark, Oscar mentioned climate science as an area of interest, and I imagine that might have been influenced by you, because your article in this month's Signs of the Times makes a really interesting point that while you went to India in the first place, motivated by the aim of poverty reduction and those sort of economic and legal issues that maybe you would have linked with your law degree, you actually started to become quite concerned about ecology, which might seem to be a bit of a strange sort of sideways jump to make. Can you talk us through that just as we finish off in these last few minutes?
Yeah, sure. So it's interesting that over the last, maybe 10 years, starting 10 years ago, our source of international news was a newspaper called The Guardian Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
That was about the only kind of window to the outside world that we had. And as we were reading The Guardian Weekly every week, we seeing a higher frequency of articles about climate change and people saying, this is a very, very serious issue, and this has the potential to undermine a lot of the development work that's gone on for the last 50 years.
Mm.
People losing their homes, increasing levels of natural disasters, all this kind of stuff. So we thought, wow, that's very serious. So as a person of faith, we believe that God has made a wonderful world for us to live in, but he's given us the responsibility to care for that world for the poor and for future generations. So when we went back to Australia in 2014 for a break, we thought, Australians are emitting huge amounts of carbon. The science is very clear. Of course, we'll find Australians desperately trying to reduce their carbon footprint. But in fact, we found the opposite. We found that Australians, really didn't care terribly much. They were more interested in, their mortgage repayments or their favourite footy team than they were about the climate.
Wow, yeah. And I think, as you point out in your article, while the wealthy countries of the world are the ones producing most of the greenhouse gases, it's often people living in the poorer countries that cop it the worst. I mean, I'm thinking of neighbouring Bangladesh to you, where just about every year they have catastrophic flooding.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And so it's a very much an issue of justice. The people who have caused the problem, that is, us people in the West, driving cars, flying, using lots of electricity, etc., we have emitted the majority of the greenhouse gases. The people in the developing world are suffering the brunt of it, exactly as you say, like people in Bangladesh or in Indonesia. As sea levels rise, it's predicted by the end of this century, we're looking at maybe up to a metre of sea level rise. And if you've got a metre of sea level rise, they're talking about 150 million people displaced.
Wow.
That's a bigger displacement of humanity that has happened in history.
Yeah.
It's absolutely enormous. And most of those people will be the poor. So it's an enormous issue of justice that we need to get our house in order to care for the poor.
Wow. And look, you've recently released a book called Low Carbon and Loving It, where I imagine you tell your story. Are these the sort of issues you're exploring in that book?
Exactly. Yeah. So when we were in Australia and we were confronted by this issue, and I was talking to politicians and did a bit of education work in schools and so forth. But I thought the best response I can make at the moment is to write a book about this. So my older son Tom, who's now 22, and I co-authored this book. And whilst it's largely about climate change, we weave in our story from India, living in slums and so forth, to make it an interesting read. So I think, even if you weren't interested in climate science, it's kind of an interesting read to read about this crazy Australian family that lived in the slum for years. But yes, in that, what we do is we compare the lifestyle of a typical Australian, who we call Bruce, and we look at Bruce's carbon footprint. We find out that it's 23 tonnes CO2 equivalent a year. And then we compare that with our real friend in a Delhi slum, a woman called Ruxana. And, we break down the carbon footprints for both Ruxana and Bruce. We look at their travel and their electricity consumption, their diet and so forth. And we find that while Bruce is 23 tonnes a year, Ruxana's is 2.3 tonnes a year.
Oh, wow.
Exactly 10%.
Wow.
So we say, that's a huge challenge for us. And then we give a series of suggestions about how we as ordinary Australians can reduce our carbon footprint. And it's absolutely doable. It's really doable. So that's the argument in the book, but we think it's a pretty interesting read too.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, if you're listening to this interview and you're thinking, wow, that sounds interesting, you probably need to check out the Mark and Tom Delaney's book, it's called Low Carbon and Loving It. You could just Google that, or you could check out their blog, which is at lowcarbonandlovingit.wordpress.com. That web address again. Yep. lowcarbonandlovingit.wordpress.com. Hey, thanks so much for your time, Mark and Oscar. We really appreciate you starting off your morning with a chat with us. And yeah, thanks for giving us a bit of an insight into your lives. It's certainly, a bit of a challenging thing for a lot of us, living in places like Australia, but something to think about. And I actually find it quite inspirational. So yeah, so thanks so much for sharing your story with us.
Thanks, Kent. Appreciate that. I've enjoyed the chat too.
Yeah, thanks. Nice talking to you.
And all the best with your exams, Oscar.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.